I would just also say that by the time that they double the TAM, right, like the investors already figured that out, like meaning like the stocks would have been trading much higher, but I think that's built into the stocks. And if you just look at AMD and the move that it's had over the last kind of month and a half ago in anticipation of this, there's been a story every day about these chips, coming out and how they're going to compete with NVIDIA and the like. And I'll just go back to a point. I think a lot of those TAMs are kind of built into the stocks right here in the valuations. We had a good conversation on Monday night about how NVIDIA has grown into that valuation as, consensus was slow coming up, right? So if you're looking at the trailing, it looked expensive and the like. I think they'll be slow to cut if there's any meaningful competitive advantage or there's a drop off in demand in 2024. And then those stocks in this one, too, in AMD, they'll start to look expensive again. So, again, I think the TAM is kind of built into the stories right now. And now it really comes down to demand. The last thing I'll just say about AMD, if you look at consensus estimates for gross margins, they're expected to go up meaningfully over the next few years, right, as they get to a doubling of their revenue, I think from like 2 years ago or something like that. So all of this stuff is really important to them. If it doesn't play out, if they start getting bad performance reviews, if some of the competition heats up from even their customers, right, are making better progress than they are on their own platforms for these sorts of chips, I mean, AMD does seem a bit vulnerable right now because it's not really reacting on any of this news.
I think we're so early in this process that the sky is the upside for all these names. But NVIDIA had 85% of the market. Now you're starting to hear about AMD potentially taking some of that market share. So I think it's a sell NVIDIA by the rest of the group.
What is the rest of the group?
AMD would be the number one. Christina said that AMD is probably the best positioned outside of NVIDIA. But if it's going to be a data center play and you're going to need DRAM and NAND, the first thing you think about is Micron. Micron has been under the radar, headwinds from China, but I think that's not going to transpire as far as cutting into 25% of their profits. Micron would be my bet.
I'm just not sure what we really learned today. I mean, we already kind of knew from Lisa Su that these chips were out. We knew that it was going to be a $2 billion, assessed dynamic. We know it's about 8 to 10% of revenue total. We know where they are relative to NVIDIA. We know that AMD is up over 80% since ChatGPT came out last year. It's priced a lot of this stuff in. I think we're all addressing the competitive landscape, which we realize is going to change dramatically, and even Intel. And again, Intel's been the best semiconductor stock to own over the last 6 months. It has been. If you look at semis overall, again, I go back to the group, and I think, the group started to give some ground. I'm not saying it's ready to really cave, but it's given up 5% relative to the S&P over the last 15 days of a market that's really had a major move. So, I don't want to call this a non-event, but it's not anything else. It's not an exciting event.
Right. Makes for good TV, right? Yeah. I think, to the question about, okay, if the TAM is so much bigger, why not change unless you're building as fast as you can? And that is the limiting factor,
right?
Not how much the TAM is.
But how do you view that? I mean, if you can't increase your revenues anyway,
I think they will be able to increase their revenues
eventually, right?
But I think of her as somewhat playing it conservative, although she's pretty pumped up on this, I got to say. This is like, of her kind of lifetime, this is the biggest kind of change that we've seen. To get to Christina's analogy of early on in the PC business, right, there were a leader and then more and more competitors, but that pie grew and grew and grew for a really long time. Now, maybe things happen quicker now, but I think that this pullback in NVIDIA and AMD is hardly really a big pullback, but to me, I feel like they're just kind of at the moment sort of trading vehicles, and they will get pumped up again as we get closer to earnings, which right now we're in the sort of, limbo between earnings. And that, I normally don't like to trade around, but I think these are vehicles made for that.